Good morning. My name is Amy Schreffler, and along with my business partner, Erin Popernak, we'd like to welcome you to today's press conference at Discovery Kids Child Care Center. Erin and I started Discovery Kids from the ground up 13 years ago. As small business owners, we have experienced hardships in the past, but this spring marked the beginning of a roller coaster ride of overwhelming uncertainty. Would Erin and I lose a business we've worked so hard to grow? Would our staff be without jobs? Would our families be without care? Without child care, how would parents work? These questions and many more consumed our community and beyond. People across the state began to recognize the service we, as early childhood educators, provide as vital to the Pennsylvania workforce. Reopening during a pandemic has had its challenges. We've had to change many policies, procedures, and daily care routines to ensure that we are compliant with all DHS and CDC guidelines. Thank you to our wonderful staff and parents for their patience and adaptability as we navigate through uncharted domain. And thank you to Governor Wolf and his administration for pushing the much-needed early childhood education legislation. The funds we received have kept our business operational, allowing us to continue to provide quality care to the children in our community. Our hope is that legislators continue to recognize the need for quality early education programs by providing the funding and resources necessary to serve our young children. Without further ado, I introduce Governor Tom Wolf.
Thanks, Amy. Thank you, Amy, for that nice introduction, and thank you for allowing us to use your school as a backdrop. As I just found out, one of my key assistants, Catherine Stetler, there's Catherine, her daughter Rebecca goes here. So that's a really nice thing for you to be back here with your daughter, and it's nice for me to be here to see this. But I think this is a really important set of issues that I want to talk about today, and this is the perfect backdrop for this. As we all know, and as Amy said, the COVID-19 pandemic has created a whole lot of pressures on families. Up until the pandemic, things were going pretty well in Pennsylvania. The unemployment rate in Pennsylvania was at an all-time low. We had a record high number of jobs, and we had revenue that allowed government to do the things that it needed to do and save money. We put money into the rainy day fund. And I track the revenues. As you know, as of February, we had $250 million surplus over what we expected our revenues to be for the fiscal year. We gave all of that up and more in just 1 month in March after the pandemic hit. And the pandemic has changed that and many more things. And it's changed things for ordinary Pennsylvanians. It's hit families really hard. And so the legislature needs to consider this as it begins to return in the fall session, and as it looks at what its agenda is going to be. We need to provide relief for families. We need to provide relief for small businesses, especially small businesses. And in addition to all that, we need to reform our government. House and Senate Democrats have been fighting for these things for years, and certainly since the beginning of the pandemic. But they've been stopped at every turn by the Republicans, who've been focused on ignoring the public health crisis or actually trashing me. That has to stop. We've got to get back to doing things that actually matter to people. And so I'm proposing today that the legislature and me, that we all take immediate steps to provide funding for frontline workers and businesses, small businesses especially, that we put into place protections for families and for workers, especially workers who are doing so much to keep us alive, and to make common sense reforms that can actually once and for all give people confidence in the government that serves them. So let me start with the need to provide protection and relief for workers. We need to do that. From the early days of this pandemic, many essential workers, such as meatpacking employees, hospital workers, grocers. I mean, some of these folks are out in front of us all the time, the frontline healthcare workers, but the folks who work in the meatpacking plants, the grocery store workers, they actually need our help, and they need our attention as well, because they kept our supply chain running. They kept us alive during this pandemic, and they were unable to stay home. So they were out on these front lines at great risk to themselves and their families, and they often carried sickness back to their families or from their families to the workplace, and this caused hardships for the grocers, for those frontline workers. So we need to assist them. We need to assist the employees who are doing all these things for us. So let's start with the businesses who need to acquire personal protective equipment. I want to provide $10 million to make sure that they have the stuff they need to keep their employees safe. I'm also calling on the legislature to pass paid parental leave so that no employee ever has to choose between work and safety. And by the way, we've looked at our own in the executive branch, and we need to do this, and so I'm announcing today that from now on, Commonwealth employees are going to have 6 weeks of paid parental leave. We can't allow this, whether it's in the administration, the executive branch, or in the private sector. We cannot allow this pandemic to morph into a homelessness crisis. So we need to make sure that we give paid family leave. And we also, by the way, need to help folks who are in homes that are at the risk of losing their utilities or being evicted or being foreclosed upon. We need to make it easier on them. So I'm going to be talking about that in just a minute. We also need to help follow up on what Amy talked about, and that is parents who are unable to return to work because they really need to stay home and take care of their kids. So we need to support child care facilities to help ensure that every family can afford care for their kids. This is particularly true as many school-age children will need full-time, full-day, wraparound services even outside of schools, even if their schools are open, and that's going to be important. Many working parents with school-age children have had to juggle work with at-home lessons, or worse, they've been forced to quit their jobs so that they could avoid paying for extra child care for their school-age children. We need to provide schools with the funding and resources they need to design robust, remote, and blended learning programs in order to reduce learning gaps and promote professional development. Next, we need to provide a path to recovery for Pennsylvania's businesses, again, especially their small and disadvantaged businesses. In the years leading up to the pandemic, small businesses employed just under half of all Pennsylvanians who were working. We need to support these small firms to help them survive. We need to help protect the jobs, particularly the small and disadvantaged businesses. The legislature needs to allocate CARES Act funding to make grants and forgivable loans available to small businesses, including the hospitality, leisure, and service industries, to help them bridge their gaps. We have about $1 billion of CARES Act funding that the legislature and I will propose to use to help the folks and businesses in Pennsylvania. This is where the money is going to come from. One other place the money might come from is if the legislature does what the lieutenant governor and I asked it to do back in the summer of last year, and that is to legalize recreational marijuana and use the income from the sale and the taxes that come from recreational marijuana to supplement these loans and carry the funding that the CARES Act doesn't. The CARES Act, we have about $1 billion. I think what I'm proposing here is about $1.090 billion. We can further assist bars and restaurants, in addition to the things I just talked about, direct funding and low interest rate loans. We can also help them by offering short-term alcohol cost reductions. In Pennsylvania, we can do that. And we can cancel, for as long as it takes, the excise tax on alcohol. Our strategic reopening plan has allowed many of these businesses to resume operations safely, and we have recovered nearly half of the jobs that we lost in the first 2 months of the pandemic, but we still need to do more. Our unemployment rate remains high. We need to do everything we can to support businesses and the workers they employ. Finally, we need government reform. We need to make sure that we have a government that the people of Pennsylvania we serve, that the people of Pennsylvania actually have confidence in. That means we have to finally pass comprehensive government reform for every branch of the government. I already did this in the executive branch. We need to expand this to the rest of government. First, we need a gift ban. It's the first thing I did, first day I was in office in the executive branch. We need to do it throughout state government. We need a greater check on income from the outside for our lawmakers so that we know that their focus is on the laws that they are passing, they're providing, and the people that they're serving. And we need, finally, campaign finance reform. We're the Wild West in Pennsylvania. We need to actually rein that in and make sure that we have campaign finance reform that actually makes sure that the people who work for the people of Pennsylvania actually are working for the people of Pennsylvania, not special interests. We need to make sure, of course, throughout this, that elections are safe and secure, and I will continue to do that and work with the legislature to do that. Again, repairing the damage of this pandemic is not going to be easy. The legislature can act right now to get us back on track as fast, as quickly as we possibly can. But we got to do it now. We must provide relief and protection for families and for workers. We got to support businesses, especially small businesses, and we have to reform our government. Our General Assembly needs to act with urgency to counteract all the negative things that have happened as a result of this pandemic. Again, they have we all have $1 billion of CARES Act funding that's being held in reserve. The total amount that we got was $3.6 billion. $2.6 billion has been committed or has already gone out. We still have $1 billion. With that, with the extra funding from recreational marijuana legalization, we can actually do things that have to be done to help families and businesses that have been so devastated by this pandemic. Now's the time to use this funding while making corresponding policy changes like paid family leave that actually makes things better for Pennsylvania families. Pennsylvania needs relief. Pennsylvania families need relief, and we all need government reform, and we all need it now. So thank you very much for being here. Amy, thank you again, and Aaron, thank you again. Where is Aaron? Aaron, thank you again for allowing me to be here, and I will be happy to answer any questions that you have right now. Yes.
I want to ask you about the election bills that were introduced by Scarnati and Corman yesterday.
Right.
How involved were you with the Republican caucuses to negotiate those bills, and were any Democrats involved?
We're active negotiating, but those were not the result of the negotiations. And I haven't read the bills yet. They just came out last night, I think. And the idea, as they said, is to increase access to elections, which I'm fine with. To the extent that it does that, that's great. If there's some things that I think restrict access to the polls or make it less safe, then I think we have some more conversation to do. But it's a first pass, and I certainly take it very seriously.
Yeah, and I also wanted to ask you, I know that the Department of State asked the Supreme Court to change the deadline for the mail-in ballots. Do you want these election questions to be resolved in the courts or in the legislature?
Ideally in the legislature. Yeah.
Governor Wolf, also included in that bill, you mentioned, or spokesperson mentioned...
What does ACRE stand for?
That's my dad's union.
Oh, sorry.
Governor Wolf,
yeah.
The bill includes restrictions on drop-off boxes, ballot drop-off boxes. You've mentioned specifically concerns about moving that deadline backwards to apply for a mail-in ballot. Do you support, or would you be okay with any restrictions on drop-off boxes?
Yes and no. I mean, I think that there's a reason to be concerned about the safety and security of those drop boxes, and I think that's legitimate. If it's basically just I want fewer options for people to vote, I want to make it less easy to vote, that's not a good idea. I think we need to figure out how to do it and address the legitimate concerns of people who want to make sure that it's done safely. Anything else? Yes. You with the F&M hat.
Yeah. Always evangelizing. Hey, Governor Wolf, I just wanted to ask you, this felt a little bit like a budget address 2.0 today. You had a budget address in February, and that we didn't get that normal evolution of a budget process because of the pandemic. And I was just wondering, are there things that you left on the table from February that you're sort of basically changing course now and saying, well, let's, I mean, does this replace the February budget address?
No, it doesn't replace the budget address, but it's looking at that $1 billion that we need to send out and saying here, and while we're at it, there are a couple other things like government reform that we ought to pay attention to. We have the resources thanks to the CARES Act. So this is separate and apart from the budget. I'm still hoping, by the way, for the budget that the federal government does actually pass some legislation that addresses the budgetary gaps that we're facing here in Pennsylvania, that every state and local government across the nation is facing. But that's a separate issue. This really is focused on essentially, aside from the legalization of medical marijuana or recreational marijuana, it's focused on using that $1 billion wisely.
Can I just follow up on that?
Yeah.
Because in the original budget, you proposed an increase in the basic education subsidy, for example, and some other
Right.
education things, and that's the thing that's top of mind for me right now. And I believe the caretaker budget that was passed basically funded schools at last year's
Level funding for the whole
So,
year, yeah.
If you want to do things like an expanded hazard pay program and these grants to businesses, I heard you say that you want to use the CARES funding for that, but because our revenues are down because of the pandemic, what are the prospects for things like more funding for K through 12 education?
Yeah, I mean that's
is that still alive?
Yeah, it is. And again, what we passed was a 5-month budget that expires the end of November. So sometime between now and the end of November, we'll have a second budget conversation, and that's when we'll talk about that issue. Right now, again, for the most part, this is about the money that remains unspent in the CARES Act.
Well, and I'm just to close the loop on this. I was wondering if you would use the CARES Act money to try to push through some of those earlier budget initiatives, because can you really do both? I mean, when your revenue's down, and this is like the one pot of money that you have, right?
No, right for now. That's what I said. I'm hoping that the federal government comes through with some more funding to help plug budget gaps, and it's that money that doesn't have the called non-supplantation. We're limited in what we can do with the funds that we have right now in the CARES Act. And one of the things I cannot do is use it to do things that I would have liked to do in my budget, like increase education funding. That's something that we're going to have to figure out to do, hopefully with some further help from the federal government. Because you're right now, like every other state, our revenues are down. But this money is focused on things that the CARES Act, with its non-supplantation language, allows us to do. And those are the things I talked about here. Anything else? Yes.
So, Governor, in order to supplement this, it sounds like you want to move forward with a proposal to legalize recreational marijuana.
That's right.
What appetite is there for that in a Republican-controlled legislature, though?
Well, that's a good question. I think there was some appetite for it before. And my hope is that with the pandemic and the hit that we've taken to revenues, that there might be a little more interest in it right now. And I think we've had a little more time to see what's happened in places like Colorado with revenues, for example, that this might be one way to plug a hole.
Governor, but how realistic is including revenue from recreational marijuana in some of these goals, including business grants, which are needed right now? Because
Right.
you would think even if marijuana was,
Right.
recreational was legalized tomorrow, it's going to take months, if not a year. For that
Yeah,
to
there's
get going.
not a lot in this. This is mostly the CARES Act funding. I think the total is $90 million, and I think we have a little over $1 billion of CARES Act funding. So there's not much. You're right. Currently, immediately, we need money for these things, and the recreational marijuana tax revenues probably farther down the road. But there's something that we can do now to start that, so that as quickly as possible we'll be able to recognize revenues from that.
Hi, Governor. How are you?
Fine, how are you?
Very well, thank you. So obviously the mail-in ballot deadline to apply is October 27th, a week before the election. Do you have any concerns for those individuals who may decide until the very last minute, getting the ballot on time, submitting it, getting it counted getting it to the election office by 8 p.m.? And is there anything that maybe the legislature could do to maybe make it postmarked before the election date?
Yeah, that's a good. They could say if you postmark it by on or before election date, if it gets there within a week, say it can count. That would be one thing. I'm suing the Postal Service to make sure that they don't unfairly slow down the mail so that people can't get that. I think there's some conversation about moving up that application from 7 days to 14 days. Again, that needs some conversation. You want to make sure people aren't being forced to vote before maybe they'd want to vote. And so I'm not sure how I feel about that. We need to have more conversation. But yes, there are a lot of things that we need to do to make sure that people who want to vote by mail, which I think given the pandemic is probably the best way I'm voting, if we do that, they're waving. If we, if people want to vote by mail, we ought to make it so that it works as well as possible.
Governor Wolf, can you elaborate on campaign finance restrictions, especially as, your campaign in 2018 and 2014 took just as much advantage of unlimited donations
Absolutely.
in Pennsylvania's
Absolutely.
System that you call the Wild West as anyone else. So, what grounds do you have to ask for this, and what do you want to see?
Well, I think having gone through this twice, I see the the crying need for this. If you see a politician who really likes all the things you need to do for fundraising, that's an unusual politician. So we need campaign finance reform, and I recognize that I didn't unilaterally disarm. That I made full use of the campaign laws that were in place in Pennsylvania. But again, it gave me a really good perspective to see how desperately we need to change that. And I would think, given the restraints that the Supreme Court of the United States has on this from the First Amendment point of view, that we have to take care in how we do this. But I would think some sort of campaign finance limits, better reporting, more transparency, those kinds of things is what we ought to look at. Again, I don't have a specific proposal right here and now, but I think we all recognize a need to make it better.
Hi, Governor. This is a question from Dennis Owens at ABC 27 News. He wants to know why eviction protections are not going to be extended after August 31st and what you would have to say to renters facing evictions during the pandemic.
Yeah, that's a great question. I've looked at that, and it doesn't look like I have the authority to do that after August 31st, but it's why it's about $225 million in what I'm proposing here that would directly affect about $100 million for the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency, about $100 million for relief for utilities, shutoffs, and things like that, to actually go through those agencies to help. I don't think I have the legal authority to extend the eviction. Anyway, at some point, that's going to go by the boards, and we're going to have to figure out some way of helping the folks who are most in need. And I think what I'm proposing here and the funding, $200 and some million, would actually do a lot to help those folks. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, Governor Wolf, with regard to the recreational marijuana proposal, as I sit here, I just think about the things that I've heard Republicans in the House and Senate get behind in that sort of vice category. Sometimes, they would like to do VGTs in bars and taverns and clubs, and they would like to privatize the state store system, the PLCB stores. I'm just wondering if you are met with those as counter proposals to legalizing marijuana for recreational purposes. Are you interested in horse trading on those sorts of things? Or are you interested in swapping marijuana for one of those other things? Or are you just looking at this in isolation? Could there be a grand compromise on these things?
I mean, I'm dealing with a legislature, so we're always talking, and there are issues that maybe I'm not aware of. But keep in mind that our state store system is very different now than it was when it was first started. I mean, you can buy wine and beer in the grocery stores. You can order wine directly from the vineyard. I'm not sure what privatization means, but places where you can buy wine and beer now are in private hands. So we've done a lot of things there. With recreational marijuana, I think this is in part recognizing the reality that people use this stuff, that if we actually regulated it correctly, and the proposal is that for people over 21 years of age, I think we have a state store system that would be an ideal way to distribute it. But I think it's also a way that the state could actually get some tax revenue from something that people are evidently already doing.
Well, are you, I guess what I was exploring there was, are you specifically asking for the legislature to consider that and do that, or are you just interested in trying to find another revenue stream for the state that something like VGTs could provide, or perhaps
I'm open to conversations about any way we can make Pennsylvania run more honestly, more transparently, more effectively. And I think over my past 5.5 years, I've shown that with my ability to talk and work with the Republican Party in both chambers of the General Assembly. Gotten a lot of things done that I'm proud of. Haven't gotten some things done that I like, but I think I've done a pretty good job of having continuous conversations on this and any other thing.
One more on the marijuana.
You got to be careful. You're sitting down because he keeps asking questions.
Pull up a chair. There we go. No, I wanted to ask you about opponents of the legalization of adult use recreational marijuana would say things like that they can point to studies that have suggested that there has been an increase in things like driving under the influence, accidents, and that sort of thing, and that there is a social cost that comes with it. I know people from time to time have argued, and I know that other people have disputed this, but there are arguments about how it's a threshold that may make it easier for somebody to try the next drug on the continuum. Are you concerned about those traditional arguments against this? And I mean, what's giving you the comfort to push this?
To me, I'm just saying, to me, those are all the more reason why you'd want to actually legalize it and have it regulated rather than what it is now, which is completely unregulated and out in the open. So I think what you just gave was an argument as to why we probably ought to bring it out into the open and regulate it. Yes. Back there.
So talking about our COVID cases in York County, hospitalizations seem to be up. There's also been 9 deaths in the last week. What is your take on that? And could you see the county moving back to like?
Well, no, I don't see us going back to the red, yellow, green categories. But it is something that we track. And as you know, the guidance that the state is and the Pennsylvania Department of Education has given to school districts is based on county performance in those areas. We're using the positivity rate and the count of disease per 100,000. And so we look at that on a county by county basis every week and provide that guidance to the schools so that they can know, if you're in a low risk county, then you probably ought to consider, more in school teaching. If you're in a high risk, you probably ought to consider more, you ought to be looking at remote. If you're in the moderate, you have sort of a mixture. But those are things that we do look at all the time. And I think education is where we really need to focus the most. I mean, across the state, we have a mask wearing ordinance. We have limits on how many people can congregate inside and outside. And I think those things are true all across the state. But when it comes to education, I think a county by county set of statistics is actually appropriate. So yeah, we are tracking that, and it's a concern.
Do you see your administration taking a very targeted approach to enforcing more restrictions on just York County rather than the entire state?
No. Again, where we've used county data is in recommendations, or just basically saying to school districts, we want you to be safe. Here's what we know. You're going to have more information at the local level, maybe than we have. But here's as much as we can share with you, as the information we have, and take that for what it's worth. And I think school districts have really, so far, done a good job of looking at that. We're early on. School isn't even open in some places, but the hope is that this county by county information actually helps. All right. Thank you very much, everybody.